Welcome to Building Inclusive Digital Communities with Josh Hotsenpiller and Megan Martin. Discover how that human connection actually accelerates business objectives. Get ready to transform and grow.
Adam, what's going on?
Josh, it's going well. Thanks for having me on.
I got to tell you, it's so emotionally pleasing to see Denver behind you. I had mentioned before we started, I grew up there, and it's just fun to see that. And I'm excited to share time.
Absolutely.
So I got to start just by saying this: that the power of digital connection fascinates me, and here's why. I just got on the Zoom, and I'm like, Adam, I can't remember. I don't know how to change my background. You're like, dude, don't worry. Go up to Zoom. Boom, 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 boom. Just like right here digitally, two cities across the world, two people come together. Somebody has domain knowledge that somebody else doesn't have. And instantaneously, there's value and utility created. This is what fascinates me about a digital world. I hear so many people say, oh, I can't wait just to get back to all in person. Let's just get rid of this digital world. And I firmly believe we're in an and world. We're in a world where physical will never go away. It's powerful and digital. And for me, just to experience right now the power of and utility of mind sharing, domain sharing instantaneously in a digital world, I just thought it was a cool way to start off. Literally, you're helping me do this before we get started. I think that's the power of what fascinates me about this category.
Sure.
So here's what I want to talk about. As we start to launch into the digital world, we have so many of our clients saying, hey, with the recession, with the digital world, we need a community. We talk a lot about inclusivity in the physical world. Adam, I just want to talk a little bit about what does it mean and what are some thoughts about how do we create inclusivity in a digital world? What are things we just need to be aware of? Because I think it's a different animal.
It is a different animal in some ways, and it's interesting how you led that off with I forget the word you used, but this like transition to digital. Having been in marketing my entire career, there's always been this digital team within a marketing department, and I think the world that we live in now, digital is really ubiquitous. So to sort of carve that out as a separate, distinct thing, I think is almost perpetuating this idea that a digital approach is different than an in-person approach. I think the core tenets that make building a community, really enacting any change initiative, the ingredients are exactly the same, whether it's digital or in person. So, and I think in digital, while those tenets are the same, the approach and how you kind of bring those things to life might be a little bit different. And I think you need to be a little bit more intentional about how you do it. So I'll give you one example of something that I'm very conscious of, Used to have large meetings, committee meetings, team meetings, in person in the office, And I think everyone can admit that at times, there can be a dominating personality, that dominates the room. But the thing about being in person, though, is at least everyone is within an eye shot. Everyone can see each other. Everyone can read the body language that people have, and sometimes the body language actually says more than words coming out of people's mouths. Now, take that same meeting onto a digital world, onto Zoom, like we're sitting on right now, There, whatever platform you're using, there's only so many boxes you can, realistically have on a screen at any one time, And I think I would even say that the preparation people have in preparing materials for a digital meeting maybe are a little bit lower than what they were in person, There's no more, we need to have handouts for everyone so everyone can follow along, or we have a presentation screen, It's just a lot more informal, whether that's how people show up and present themselves, It's, or the materials that you're actually going through. So I think the unstructuredness of some digital meetings is really good to help replace some of the camaraderie you might get, around a water cooler in an office. But ensuring everybody has a voice in that meeting is exponentially more difficult, Whether you're not able to read body language, you're not able to actually see everyone's facial reactions on the screen. As a presenter, if I'm presenting something, now my screen's taken over by what I'm presenting, and I'm actually no longer reading, and being able to adapt, my talk track based on the responses in the room. So I think there's some unique things that you need to do with intention to engage, to build that inclusive meeting culture, community, whatever it is on a Zoom environment, Ensuring that you call on the people that aren't speaking, right? I mean, that is a common thing I think leaders do, inclusive leaders do, whether it's digital or in person, but ensuring that you're actually calling on people and giving them the voice, right? I think
let me ask you a quick question just before we go on, because I think it's interesting. You're right. When you get in a physical room, there is aura, there is domineering, there's the magnanimous people that think quick, react quick. In some ways, let's say your cameras, there's an effect, but let's talk even just like the broader digital community. Do you think that there has been a balancing of hierarchy now? Because, have you ever noticed, like when people are on social media, people that are like introverted and don't usually say a lot, all of a sudden have got an opinion on Facebook or whatever, on Twitter, whatever it might be. Has there been a balance of domination? Because now outward personality is less meaningful than maybe even sometimes that your ability to intellectually express through written word too. So is there a value there too of like leveling the field or maybe not? I don't know.
Leveling, I'm not sure. I think in my experience, I actually see a greater divide and more of a gulf. Because in a physical meeting, right, there might be side conversations. Like how many times have you sat in a room and leaned over to your colleague, right, while somebody else is presenting just to kind of hash out an idea or whatnot. You can't really do that, right, in a virtual meeting, or maybe on the walk back to your desk, right? You can kind of, so it takes actually carving out time on your calendar to maybe have that follow-up meeting, right? For those introverts, maybe they're uncomfortable. Literally, it's about creating the space, right, for them to then express themselves. So in a meeting with a dozen other folks on it, there's nothing you can do to make them comfortable in that environment, right? You have to give them the time outside of that. And I think the challenge that I know I run into, I'm sure you do as well, right? I'm sitting in Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, eight hours a day. So there isn't even the time in the day to then have those sidebar conversations. So how do you create the space, the safe space where folks that might be hesitant to share their thoughts and opinions feel comfortable to do so? And I think even just as a manager of people, I found that the nature of even my one-on-ones has changed significantly moving into the digital thing. So now we're talking about a community of two, right? The relationship between two. How would you think, when you have to pre-schedule the time to have the one-on-ones, you can't do drive-bys by people's desks anymore. You still want to talk about, the tactical work that you need to do. And often that kind of overtakes just from kind of the needs, right? Because time is valuable. Right. So you kind of forgo some of the other stuff that is more the softer things, that you can help, as a leader, help, those under your care, help them grow their careers, help create that path for them. Some of that stuff kind of takes a back seat because we're fighting for each other's time that we have to pre-schedule, right? Yeah. We don't have that kind of the natural thing. So you said something at the outset, and I think that's really what makes building communities a success is you need to combine both the digital community and the in-person community to really see the full effects, because some of the mediums are just naturally, right, bringing out certain things, and it's just that much more difficult to bring it up. So you really need both, I think, is the recipe for success of building a community.
So you brought up a word which I think is not focused on enough, but I think it's powerful, especially in inclusivity, is intentionality. And I think what makes a great leader is an intentional leader. And so now, if we weren't intentional before, I'm hearing you say it's even harder to be intentional now. So what are some ways that you found to be an intentional leader in a digital community for the purpose of inclusivity?
I think it really is a leader needs to have a certain trait within them. They need to be reflective, self-reflective, right? And they need to be aware of at least the bias that they carry.
Yep.
Right. So I think some of the tactics that I've done is, I just remind myself, I read up on this stuff. I try to stay up to date, but I think there's two kind of forces that are making this more challenging, right? You've got the challenges of just interacting in a digital format, right, is kind of one massive challenge that we have to obviously overcome. But also the nature of people is changing at an accelerating pace, and what people need, right? Obviously, with whether it's the Me Too movement or any of the other things that are kind of in pop culture right now, expectations of employees are changing, right? And as a leader, we not only have to overcome the challenges of the tool sets that we have and, just the challenges of operating in a workspace, but also keeping pace with kind of that expectation changing, from our employees. And as a marketer, I kind of twist that around to say it's kind of the same concept of consumer expectation, right? Consumer expectation is changing with the advent of digital tools, right? People want immediacy. People don't have patience for those things. And I think that is also, we're seeing in employees as well, right? They want to join an organization and they want to have everything that they're used to in their personal lives. They want to analog to that in the work environment. So how do I, as a leader, provide them the tools to do that? But also be self-aware enough and not overconfident enough in my approach that I'm willing to adapt and change to meet those evolving expectations, and then do that on an individual basis. Because ultimately, I think that's what makes an effective leader, a leader of building a community, whatever it might be, is understanding that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, right? We're dealing with people at the end of the day. People is what makes a community, and people respond to different things. So it's my job as a leader to adapt and meet them where they are, and provide maybe even redundant tools so that, it's intuitive, right, for the end users.
So a couple of thoughts I had. One was, I was thinking about meetings and inclusivity. And, it's funny, in a lot of meetings, we have a guy on our team that is, he's got a answer or a thought for everything. And they're good too. It's not like it's bad, but he does, no matter what, he's got an answer and a thought for everything. And it's interesting on our meetings now, and I had worked with them in the physical for a decade. And now we're in a virtual, and he lives 20 miles this way, and I haven't seen him in however long. It's funny, you see him every day. But it's interesting now when we're in these meetings and you kind of have to raise your hand, and as the leader, you get to decide who you're going to activate. And I think some of those basic things that are cool too, whereas normally in a meeting, in the physical, he wouldn't have put his hand up. I wouldn't have called on him. But now there's almost some controls where you can go, wait a minute, here's how I'm going to run this meeting with some controls, with some cadence, with, hey, I haven't heard from you yet, even though I see, we'll call him Jim's hand up again on his little Zoom, or hey, I'm not going to say yes to that. We're going to have a holistic conversation. So I think there are some value efforts where I can control this meeting a little bit more now than I ever could before. Which I think is just interesting. I think it's good for us to remember there are some controls we have. But I want to ask you one other thing. Different cultures and different ethnicities, oftentimes this is kind of something that we've got to keep working to break the cycle. But birds of a feather flock together, as the saying goes, right? And so you go to a workplace, and I do a lot of work on inclusivity, and you go, this ethnicity is kind of hanging out together, eating together, weekending together, etc. And we assimilate often, even if we say we're kind of not doing it. What I find interesting is it's not like an ethnicity or a culture is using this technology platform and one is using this one. We're all using the same tech stack to interact. And I think it's almost this unique thing where it's like you can't, in a digital environment, Twitter, Facebook, your own internal tools, segment off into your own little world. You really do have to coexist. And I think there's a powerful medium there that we go, look, we're all here. This is the place that we interact. We can't go, we're all going to go to our place of faith here. We're all going to go to our restaurants here. We're all going to go to our weekending here. No, we're all here. And so how do we begin to say, I want to learn from the things that you're doing. I want to interact with you, because we can't segregate out of here. We're all here together. There's a value in that. How do we maximize that value, since we can't segregate and we do have to assimilate into this environment of digital? Where's the big value proposition as individuals? What can we gain from that? Does that make sense?
A little bit. It's interesting. I think maybe we're at the point of adoption of some of these digital collaboration tools, communication tools, where we have the opportunity to do exactly what you're saying. But I do think if we don't take it seriously now, and I give you a lot of praise for even having this conversation, because right, even talking about race in the modern day is kind of taboo, right? But let's take Slack, for example. We're a company that uses Slack. They were just acquired by Salesforce. It's flexible enough to serve different organizational needs.
Yep.
Right. And I think there's a fine balance between, anytime you launch a new tool, you have to worry about adoption. So how do you make it relevant and easy to adopt for your user base, which probably exists on a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Right. But if you don't give it enough governance, right, it can go off the rails very easily, and you're talking about segmenting, maybe even self-segmentation, right? You can create channels and you can create private channels, and everyone that has the ability to access Slack is going to have the ability to create their own little segment.
Yep.
So I think it's an organization's duty when you roll out new tools like this to provide some governance structure to make sure that we don't go into that rabbit hole of hyper segmentation, but still giving it open enough to where people can self-select into certain things of relevance, right? So where that balance lies, I think, is the biggest challenge, right? And that's going to be unique to every organization.
It is. And I think what gets me excited, and I think about our own Slack, and I've seen and shared things in Slack with people I've never met. And I really, it's there's a young lady that works for us on a project, and she kind of got assigned to the CEO on this project. I've never met her. We've been working together for 6-8 weeks. And I was like, Jessica, it just occurred to me, I have absolutely no idea where you live. And I know that you're married. I know that last weekend you guys went out and got a wine night together on Friday. She showed up and she had her hair all done. I was like, Jessica, where you what's going on? And oh my gosh, me and my husband are going on this wine night tonight. I'm like, so fun. Weeks later, I'm like, where do you live? And we're like, I have like all of a sudden, like there's all these abilities to work with people, know things about them, share emojis on Slack, cheer people on, and realize like, I don't really even know where you live. And to me, the upside of that is I would have never had a relationship with you. I would have not been able to know these things. Obviously, the downside is there's things I don't know, but I think that there's so much opportunity if we lean into these more quick connections and saying, hey, I'm gonna value this. I'm gonna get to know you. I'm gonna encourage you. People say things to me and send emojis to me that I think if we were sitting in a room and I was their CEO, I don't think they would do that. I think they might, I just don't, I don't, fire emoji, hey, these kind, and you're like, they almost become more expressive and vulnerable because there's these bridges of expression. And I think that's one of the cool things that we can think about is like, I like what you're saying about there's governance and there's thoughtfulness and there's intentionality. And I almost feel like you almost need a playbook of like, guys, we really want to be inclusive. We want to be vulnerable. We want to be expressive. We think that's the future of human connection. So we're going to champion that from the top down by doing those type things.
That's it. Top down. It's, all those attributes you said, whether it's inclusivity, I mean, what the story you told was certainly intentional, right? You realized something and you didn't, in the digital world, you just asked her outright where she lived, right? So kudos to you as a leader that is now modeling the behavior that you want your team to then embody. And I think that's the single thing that leaders can do with intention, right? Is to model that behavior. It takes somebody to take that leap of faith first. Yeah. And that has to be the leader. So whether that's vulnerability you shared, right? Whether that's me sharing something about maybe an insecurity or a challenge that I'm facing in my personal life, right? And kicking off a team meeting with that, right? It signals to everyone else that, this is a safe space where you can do the same, because everyone is struggling with the same, thoughts, whatever that is on some different grade. It doesn't matter what tier of the hierarchy you might live in an organization. Right. And humanizing some of that in the digital world is very difficult. And I think your example of using, emojis and things like that, it does exactly that. It disarms people. It makes things a little bit more casual. It humanizes people in a certain way because now you're able to express it. So like, I guess an organization does need to determine what place emojis have in their culture and their environment and how to use that. But I think the other benefit the use of emojis in business has that's positive is it helps bridge the communication divide between generations as well. It does. Right. So I think digital tools are definitely bringing people together in those ways. But and I'll hit on it again. You kind of repeated it. It's about an organization providing enough governance so that those tools are used effectively, because they can very easily go off the rails. I mean, look at MySpace and social media. I mean, social media versus Facebook, right? MySpace was incredibly successful, a decade plus ago, but they had little governance. And what ended up happening is you had a ton of performance issues, you had a ton of content issues, right, going out there. And then people ended up abandoning the platform. Yeah. So, but Facebook provided some more guardrails, and look how successful they've been today, regardless of how you feel about any of their, underlying business practices. Yeah. So it's that same concept though. The organization's duty is to provide these tools to help bridge these generational divides, communication divides, but still provide enough governance so that, they have some level of control about the outcome.
I mean, as we close out here, I'm going to close out with, this is my big takeaway from this is, if you don't have a framework and governance for how digital will create inclusivity, it will have the ability to create exclusivity or irrelevancy. So you've got this asset, an opportunity right at your fingertips, and it has great power to create inclusivity, vulnerability, et cetera. But our job as leaders inside of our organization is to go, and this is where I'm going to bring it back to where you started, where digital was a channel of marketing. No, this is the whole kit and caboodle. Digital is the way the world is going to function going forward. And now we got to begin to say to ourselves, what is our vision for how digital will be used to accelerate culture and inclusivity, and what do we want for that? We actually have to spell that framework out and then model it within our organization, not just go, that's just a tool, right? That's just like a way we communicate, right? You're like, there's more relationships forged and gorged on digital than in physical now. And so we have to take this thing and say, this is a tool to accelerate, where we want to go. So it's good thoughts.
That's 100% it. I think, historically, technology is the responsibility of maybe an IT team, a small group within an organization, right? But really, technology is the duty of every leader and every employee in every organization nowadays. And you can't skirt that, right? And like these positive outcomes that you're trying to deliver about bridging divides and building inclusivity does not happen by happenstance. It takes leaders to model that behavior, provide that structure, to really change culture. Cultures don't change on their own, but it still comes down to people at the end of the day. The tool only enables what the people want it to do, right? A technology is not a Staples easy button that just delivers the outcome.
Nope. And I go back to the way we started this thing, where I still think the number one accelerator of inclusivity is vulnerability. And even for me to get on here as the host of this thing and go, Adam, how do I do this background? And you're like, oh, go up here and do that. And immediately you go, okay, we kind of get what this is now. This is a safe place of human beings to solve problems together. And I think as leaders, that the most powerful thing we can do is just go, hey, how do I do something? I don't know something. Let's have a collective and do something. So, hey man, thanks for making time with us. I appreciate it. It's always fun.
Thanks for having me on, Josh.
Conversations about where the world's going.
Absolutely. I love this kind of stuff.
Cool, man. I appreciate it.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. Let this story inspire you to the serious work needed to build an inclusive digital community that makes a difference for your network and your brand. For more conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the show at junolive.com/podcast. Don't forget to share this show with your network so we can all learn from each other how to build inclusive communities. We'll be talking more about this episode on LinkedIn, where you'll find us under Juno Live. See you on the next episode.